There we go. We're on. Fantastic. So glad that you could join us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so you're at the Kennedy School.
That's correct. Yeah. So
Right.
Natalie and I, just by way of background, we co-lead the mental health and drug policy caucus at the Kennedy School.
Oh,
However, both of us have now left. Natalie's currently packing up her apartment in Somerville, and I'm back in Australia. So,
we know
um,
Sven. Oh yeah,
yeah.
here the twang there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
the ear grate a little bit. We're very lucky to have you today. We've been trying to organise a time with your extremely busy schedule to make this work. And even though it's at the end of our semester, we're very grateful. And our students and team are very happy that you could make it. So thank you so much.
All right.
Putting out, I mean, you're quite the legend in this field, in the mental health field, and so it's a real honor to get to talk to you. We wanted to structure the conversation today. So my background is more in the building organizations, and Natalie has a background as a clinician, but also building organizations in mental health. So Natalie's going to focus on the kind of individual component to trauma and trauma recovery, and then I'll jump into more the systematic thinking from our experience this year and some of the reflections that we've had. And then we've got some questions from the participants as well. So if that's okay, we'll over to you, Natalie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you so
curious
much
what
for
question you have. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So appreciate you joining us. Little background on myself. I'm a family nurse practitioner and have admired your work, actually both as a patient and a provider, having experienced chronic pain myself,
Yeah.
and of course dealing with patients with
Right.
complex pains and complex trauma
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in
That's how
how
we become
chronic.
therapists, of course. Huh?
Yeah,
That's how we become therapists, because we try to solve our own issues. Yeah.
exactly. And it wasn't, of course, till your book where I had, a lot more insight on everything, but it made me all the more interested in how chronic physical conditions and trauma interact. So I'm wondering, how can healthcare providers and systems effectively integrate trauma-informed care into our daily practices?
That's a very big question. Huh? Indeed. So I just came from an interview with Time Magazine, and they asked me the similar questions. And basically, my foundation has a new chief science officer, former postdoc of mine, who's now a professor at the New School. She did a survey recently of all PhD programs in psychology in the US, what they were teaching about trauma. It turns out not a single program has a trauma track or required trauma course. Basically, our mainstream institutions, and that's where we all come from originally, are still all about, there's two things: you can yak and talk about your trauma, or you can take a pill and make it go away. And so the whole issue that you can actually do something to change the way you live in your body, that the way you breathe, the way you move, the way you interact with other people, can really change your mental state, is still an alien concept in our mainstream thinking. So, I just finished this other interview, and they asked me, what are your dreams for the future? I said, to do a study comparing tango dancing with CBT as a treatment of trauma. When I've gone to Argentina, I'm just blown away what a traumatized country it is. And then you see people tango dancing. They had to invent that to learn to be in sync with each other, because when you're traumatized, you're out of sync. And this whole issue of being in sync seems to be an alien concept for most therapists. Not you as a practitioner. I'm sure you really try very hard to be in sync with people, but that is the essence for art, to feel safe and to feel calm and connected. It's like raising small kids. You need to be physically in sync with them. And this whole issue of synchronicity and moving together and hearing each other and being responded to is really not at the center of our teaching. And so, and again, go back to my last interview also, I did the first study on Prozac, for PTSD. And I was part of the first study on Zoloft to PTSD because back in 1980s, we had discovered chemicals and we thought chemicals would solve mental problems. And after my studies, I realized they're not bad, but they're not all that helpful either for many people. And so I moved on, but my profession got stuck. And they think that if you feel bad, just let's give you the right pill. And psychiatry lost its notion of a mind
Mm.
and notion of that you are a creature that is embedded in a larger social system. And so we got this DSM thing. And, I was part of the DSM for a long time and very active in it at the beginning because it looked promising. And then it turned out that we really missed the boat on most things, that we have a crazy diagnostic system. And everybody knows it's crazy diagnostic system. Head of NIH said, this is not working, we should stop it. He said that 20 years ago, and people have never changed the system, and they still talk about people having oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder and all these disorders that really are like saying they have a pimple. Like
Yeah.
it really doesn't get into really what's going on with people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really wasn't until my personal journey in health that I started to explore this and really understand that, because as a practitioner, it was very algorithmic, like you said. You try a lot of medications, you try a lot of things, but you're really not getting to that root cause. And I shifted my practice and started my own integrated primary care. So really trying to take in a lot of these therapeutic mind-body connection approaches.
So for me, my introduction was EMDR. Have you ever done EMDR?
I haven't done it, but I had my colleagues that we worked with did it for our patients, and
so
I know that.
EMDR is a crazy treatment. You ask people to call something up in their minds. You don't ask them to tell you about it. And you say, just go there. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? And then you say, how intense is this? So out of 10, it's pretty intense, at 9. And then you say to people, so stay there. And you ask people to track your fingers as you track your fingers back and forth. That's a bizarre treatment. And people in my clinic started to do it. And I told them, stop this nonsense. We at Harvard, we don't do stupid stuff like that. And then it turned out he had amazing results. So I did a study funded by NIMH because I'd done the project study. I was still a respectable person at that point. I said, oh, let's study this crazy treatment for project, because so intimating the project would be much better. Turns out that EMDR had amazing results. But what's also interesting to me is that despite the amazing results, it didn't make a dent because it didn't fit in with the paradigm. Because the paradigm is talking and drugs. And if you move your fingers aside, that's crazy. And then I started to look at Tai Chi and yoga. And it turned out that yoga was more effective for PTSD than most conventional medications. You go like, that's weird. Putting your butt in the air and twisting your body into a passive. So it doesn't fit in with the paradigm. And so once you start opening yourself up to other paradigms, you get to, as you discover, everybody who I know who has survived trauma and done some healing has discovered that.
Yeah.
I need to move. I need to move with my body. I need to live in my body. I need to do something in my body. And that may be different for different people, but you need to really go inside to find peace with that organism that you live in. And
Absolutely.
the issue of chronic illness is a very huge issue that sort of gets separated out from the trauma story. So tell me your trauma story, but people who are traumatized live much shorter than people who don't get traumatized. And so it affects the whole system, the organism that you live in, and you need to deal with that organism. And we have a long way to go to do better with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just super quick, just for anyone who might be newer in the space, how would you define trauma? Does it have, can it be little? How big does it have to be to actually impact you to this level?
It's a tough question. Had my science officer Wendy just gave a talk. She said, I have decided not to define trauma because it's just too all-encompassing. But for me, trauma is an overwhelming experience where you go like, oh shit, and you see nothing you can do to affect what's going on. And I think the issue of physical immobilization is a very important part of it. Like when you get raped, you try to fight back and you can't do anything. When you get molested, when you get mugged, there's nothing you can do. And so your body is unable to activate its action system. And it's interesting when the work for had Joe Ledoux was studying all these fear systems in the brain, and what he discovered in animals, that as long as animals can move, they do okay and adjust themselves to the circumstances. But it's physical immobilization that really gets people in their trauma. And I'm careful not to be too doctrinaire about it, because I'm sure there are people who get traumatized at times that they can do something, but the issue of an inability to activate your emotion network is probably a very important part of it. I don't know what your experience was in that regard, but
yeah, no, it did. I mean, it took me a long time to unlearn what I had learned, and then have the honestly courage to go inside and start exploring what could be going on, and peeling back all the layers. But once you're able to get there and find that peace, your body just feels that level of homeostasis again. It feels like you're back in sync, and it interacts well, and you sustain that level of healthiness, which is pretty amazing. I always
I don't know how personal you want to get, but I think working with body work is very important.
super.
So from my own background, so I was born in 1943 in the Netherlands, and my generation became famous because we were a starved generation, and they followed us up, and a lot of schizophrenia and other illnesses were accompanied by that because so many kids died. And I was a very sickly kid who also was on the verge of death for much of the first 2 years of my life. And I did okay in school, so I was always a bright kid. But there was also always something in my body that was the body of a sick child. And maybe the most useful thing I ever experienced myself was getting rolfed. Rolfing is a very intense body method where they sort of tear your muscles apart so you can, but it really had a very profound effect on the way that my body lives in the world. It's not cognitive, hard to explain, but it really had a very profound impact. And so the whole issue of working with the body is completely absent from our culture, of course. Yeah.
Totally. It was my physical therapist and integrative team that really unlocked the answers for me after bouncing to a lot of ortho and specialists. I had a bad chronic hip injury, back, hip, and it took those type of approaches to really allow my nervous system, my mind, my body to calm down, and again find that level of health.
I hope you're going to be vocal about that, because that's many people say that, and it's very important, actually. Yeah.
It's what I went through. I absolutely preach now, and I practice it as well with my current integrated primary care practice. So but again, thanks to you.
Are you an MD?
I'm a nurse practitioner, a family nurse practitioner. Yeah. So try to combine all my experiences and make sure that we're approaching this as holistically as possible. But I don't want to take too much. Yeah.
Do you find that your community has become larger, that over the years you find more and more colleagues who are sort of in sync with you? Is it?
I do. I think little by little, I feel that we're also getting frustrated with the sick algorithmic pharmaceutical approach, and really finding that we need to peel back these layers. We need to ask our patients the right questions, and that goes back to even what their life was like in utero. So it's asking the right questions, it's getting that detailed history, and really building out an integrative team for them, because the one medication, two medication isn't going to be the fix that the quick fix that everyone was hoping for. Turns out there's no such thing. But kind of shifting that and seeing seeing this on a systemic level, want to push it over to Chris and see how we can expand this conversation. You know, I did move from the Kennedy to the Kennedy School because I felt, as much as I loved that my clinical room, there was so much more to be done on the health systems level to ensure these type of
Oh, yeah.
approaches.
I'm very
Everywhere.
jealous as a teacher at the Kennedy School, actually. Such a nice other world besides the medical world. And yeah, it's great. Yeah.
One of the, I guess the experience probably Natalie and I shared, and a lot of people on this call would have shared, is this year. I mean, it's been quite unique in that, you know, with the conflict that's happened, and as an Australian coming into that and witnessing that, and seeing the
American political scene or Israeli one?
well, the Israeli Middle Eastern conflict coming and playing out, and it's sort of brought, I guess, brings it home to the fact that there is so much intergenerational trauma that exists in the world that plays out, and to a point that's quite difficult to kind of hold space for and work with. And as a leader and thinking about this, what have you seen at a systematic level that has been helpful, either through policy or through political leadership, that has helped process intergenerational trauma beyond the cyclical nature that we see today?
Well, I think it's a really important question. And I think you need people besides me to address it, actually, is that I think we barely study the way that other cultures do it. For example, having grown up in Europe, the biggest miracle of history was the European Union. As a kid, I used to ride my bikes through Germany and France and Belgium, etc. And every little town has a monument to all the people who died in every war. And in 1945, they stopped killing each other. And they were building up the national identity for a new identity. And that was really a stunning movement that doesn't get celebrated at all. But Europe had basically been at peace for the longest period of history ever, because able to do that. And I saw it in South Africa. It didn't go deep enough and long enough, but what Mandela and Tutu and the Truth people did, they kept the peace at a time that the country was ready to explode. So leadership of that really, I think Roosevelt was a similar leader of really giving people moral values and moral beacons. If they are important. I think Zelensky may be playing that role in Ukraine. Isn't it fascinating that this comedian got elected in Ukraine at this moment of time, and anybody else would have probably done a very different job. But there was something about this guy who has the capacity to at least inspire us. I hope he's as inspiring to the Ukrainians as about us. So leadership is terribly important. And then also it's this very curious thing, for me that's really amazing, is that, you know, growing up where I have, of course, I was always intrigued with Hitler and Nazis. And we all have explanations for what happened in Germany because they were humiliated, put down, they had inflation, and things were going terribly. And now we see a similar phenomenon happening in the US. But we are economically better off than we have ever been before. We have more opportunities than before. And so for me, the big question is, why does hatred continue to exert such a powerful force in people, even when people are doing fundamentally okay? That's something for you guys to solve, because that's the issue. Like, why does that? So one of my teachers, you may have heard of him, Alvin Semrad was my big teacher at Harvard. He used to teach us, hate makes the world go round. And of course, as a kid, you sort of dismiss that. But that brings to my mind a lot, that it's very activating to hate people. It gives you righteousness, gives you energy, gives you a troop to hang out with. And the question is, how can you help people to not live by hate? And of course, you see it in Israel, Palestine. They live on hate. And how you change that? And I think you change it primarily by changing economic conditions.
So for you, it's a, I mean, that sort of goes against that's the paradoxical situation, like where, as you said, in the US, where in these, you know, economically very different to the Weimar Republic in Nazi Germany, and yet there's. What's your view on social media? Like, I mean, and the role that it has with sort of spreading kind of hate.
I think media are very important. For example, I really dislike the way that all American media are talking about what's happening in Israel-Palestine. They say you're either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. There's nothing to do with it. You get people killing each other, you get people locking each other up, you get people torturing each other. Not whether you hate you not shouldn't kill Jews or shouldn't kill Arabs. You shouldn't kill people. But press right now puts oh, you're either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel. I'm not pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel. I have very good Palestinian friends. I have very good Israeli friends. I don't want any of them to die. I want all of them to thrive. But our press puts it in that particular way. And the press, there's some very serious injustices happening on the West Bank against Palestinians, and we should pay attention to that. And the Jews have the legacy of the Holocaust, which also should pay attention to it, but they're acting it out on each other, and that's not the right thing. And the press actually is framing it in a way where you have to choose sides to be for one group of people, not the other. And I don't think that's realistic.
It's I mean, it's becomes quite this like adversarial kind of situation, and even I mean, probably people on the call will agree, like in the Kennedy School, like to express a kind of, especially if you're trying to learn about a particular context, it's almost like the expectation you have to choose a side before you actually understand what is going on, and expressing something with a lower amount of knowledge, like what we're trying to learn, often means that you're that in that side or that or the other. How do you think, I mean, understanding one's own trauma and sort of supporting, like, how do you see therapy or processes of supporting people being able to scale, given the expensive nature? I mean, even doing yoga classes is expensive, out of reach for many people, perhaps. What does a trauma-free world look like from?
I'll give you a two-part answer. This is a little complicated. One is that Jessica Stern, who was Clinton's terrorism advisor, and I wrote an article for Foreign Affairs right after October 7th, and but we said that people love to claim the victim role. And once you have the victim role, it gives you permission to do terrible things to other people. And so as long as you stay in your trauma mode, that you are allowed to take revenge on whoever you think is the cause of it. And that should be the core issue, is to how do we get away from the I'm the victim and you're the perpetrator of stuff, and that we do these things to each other. The second piece of response I have to you thing is that we just finished a very large psychedelic piece of research that was very important, and the most important study I've done in my lengthy career. And on psychedelics, people develop a sense of compassion for themselves, to really say, this is what happened to me. I did the best I could, and I didn't deserve what happened to me. And a deep sense of self-compassion and self-tolerance. But the next step is they have compassion for their perpetrator. And they say, my father was a violent alcoholic, and he did terrible things to me, but he was completely formed by that and that in his life. And I feel so sorry that he never had the chance to feel what a beautiful child I was. And as a result, I never had the feeling that my father really loved me. But boy, if my dad hadn't been so traumatized, he would have had a much better life and really enjoyed his family. And so when you really get into really dealing with your trauma and laying it to rest, you also start having compassion for other people.
And I think that goes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say too. I think that goes, so much into that parenting component as well. If you have those parents who have gone through that process and then are able to really teach their children and interact with their children in those very more compassionate, understanding, therapeutic ways, also helping break a little bit of that cycle.
It's interesting that, so I have some very close Israeli friends, and I read Haaretz. And boy, Hermès gives you a very different version of what's going on. And in Hermès, people say regularly, this is not the Holocaust. October 7th was terrible, but it should not be compared to the Holocaust. The Holocaust, we got wiped out, and we are doing the same thing to the Palestinians. And here, there's Israelis who really have a perspective of themselves as we have all been hurt, and we are actually part of the continuing hurt that we're inflicting on each other. But that's probably not the majority newspaper in Israel.
Maybe you could. There's a lot of questions came through before on the psychedelic work. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about the trial, and also what do you see? What's a vision for how psychedelics could play within the mental health system?
Well, first of all, the FDA advisory committee that just came out is bizarre.
Bizarre.
We did a study,
Not happy
and
about it.
our study was just declared 2 years ago as one of the 10 most important scientific breakthroughs in the world. And we studied well over 200 people, and people had very deep and often very painful experiences, but almost everybody got dramatically better. And the FDA advisory group said, we haven't studied side effects well enough. We studied side effects as carefully as any study I've ever done, and there were no side effects. And this committee says, we should be more worried about people having strokes and heart attacks. But we didn't have any evidence for that in these very large studies. And so it was just a bizarre report. And part of my take on this is that many of them came from the VA. That doesn't really have, it's a terrible track record of taking care of people. And the idea that people actually, psychiatry is very much focused on what's wrong with you. And we never ask people, what's right with you? What do you feel proud of? What have you accomplished? And so we always focus on the pathology. And when you start working with psychedelics, people also have beautiful experiences and loving experience. Well, love and beauty is not part of our field. If it matters you have fun.
Yeah. Okay. Heaven forbid. Yeah.
For me, the most dangerous
You'd be out
word
of the jobs.
is fun. That people may have fun doing something is just anatomy. And that's give you Prozac so you can no longer sexually function. That's good. A small price you have to pay for not being dragging yourself out of bed.
Yeah. But
you actually feel alive. I mean, all these things that I do that help people alive, I've always got a lot of suspicion about it. We got a CDC grant to study theater in traumatized high school kids. Very good treatment. Nobody took it on. Yoga, much better than their bodies. No.
Yeah.
Prozac, yeah.
Well, what's I guess brilliant about your work is I guess it would be safe to stick with the common, how things have been done before, which is medicate and put people into rooms and isn't that you've really created the hope and inspiration for new possibilities of processing trauma in ways that that are fun and enjoyable. Perhaps as a last sort of a last question, what is your you've really led the way in this work in kind of helping people process trauma over their lives and to live more peaceful lives. What would you like to see as a vision of in 20 years time in terms of what does a trauma less world look like for you? What are in your dreams?
I want to argue with the first thing you said. You said you have led the way. Actually, my book is a summary of the work of my colleagues and myself. And I don't feel I led the way. I just lucked out to write.
That's a sign of a good leader.
but really, I really believe that there are several people who I mention them all in the book, who have been my teachers, my inspiration of people my age, who don't get the income from my book, but I do. but it's certainly not a sole phenomenon at all. I'm not the world's expert on working with the body, but I learned that from Peter Levine and Pat Ogden and all the other people I mentioned in my book. So no, I happen to put it together, but it doesn't come from me. Also come from me, but not primarily. Second thing um, is I think the recognition of that by and large people do the best they can. And so if you have read my book, I talk a fair amount about Pierre Janet. It's interesting. Earlier today, I did a conference with France, and Pierre Janet was a Frenchman, was in 1936, Harvard, when it gave its honorary doctorates to the greatest people in their field, they gave the award to Pierre Janet, not to Jung, not about Freud. So they recognized what I recognized, that he was the greatest guy around. And he said, every life is a piece of art put together with the means at your disposal. I think that's a beautiful definition for all of us. You do the best you can, but your best may not be good enough. So I can help you. How can I help you to have a more productive life? In our neurofeedback work, neurofeedback is brain-computer interface work where you really help to regulate people's brain rhythms. That has not nearly as much acceptance as I wish it had. People actually become more focused, and you use it for optimal functioning. So neurofeedback we use to help very disturbed and very unfocused and confused people. But the Italian football team also used it to win the last World Cup.
There you go.
And so I think our focus should be on optimal functioning rather than what is wrong with you. How can I help you to engage in the best way that's possible for you? So get away from the punitive, you're fucked up and I'm going to punish you for doing it, or I'm going to analyze you out of it. Say, okay, what can you do? And I feel pathetically uninformed about mental functioning. There's one thing, before the drugs came into our field, people studied Piaget, and they studied serious stuff about how the mind develops and how at different stages in your development. I don't know if you have kids or grandkids, but I have grandchildren who I see 3 times a year, and every time I see them, I meet a different child because these functions change. And what Janet already pointed out, and our work very much supports it, is that when you get traumatized, you get sort of stuck at the mental level of what happened to you at that particular age. And so when you're 2 years old, the world is an all or nothing world because that's where you get stuck. And then the question becomes, how can I help this brain to change so you can see multiple perspectives? And neurofeedback is one of them, and psychedelics is another way of doing it. But I think we need to get away from the pathology model into what isn't working and what is working, and how can we move the system to be able to engage more fully. It's interesting because I was lucky enough to send my kids to the Park School, very, very nice, upper class Boston school. And the school system was totally into that. This is a very privileged school. But when you send your kids to the Boston public school system, if they do something that's unpleasant, you're bad, you get put isolated in the corner, you're labeled, and that label you carry with the rest of your life. And so a lot of self-fulfilling prophecy in that. I hardly ever hospitalize somebody in a psychiatric hospital, because once you have that label, that becomes your identity. They know something about it. and so these labels can be very dangerous.
Absolutely.
And if you say, I have problems really understanding other people's point of view, you can say, okay, let's work on that.
I mean, I think that resonates so much, both obviously in the healthcare setting, but going back to that leadership setting you were talking about as well, just having that space, the Viktor Frankl, the power between the stimulus and response, and having that amount of space can really be a game changer in within yourself and your decisions, but as a leader, how you're going to act on some of those more difficult demanding, conflictive decisions. So
Yeah.
it's
So if you'd ask me, how do you change the paradigm? No, I've not spelled it out completely, but I would really focus on executive functioning. How well are you able to formulate what you want to do and then carry out what you want to do? And what we know about brain studies is that all kind of stuff gets in the way when you get traumatized. How your default network gets changed. And we know that the default network is sort of your habits that your brain gets into. And the research now shows more and more that to change the default mode network, you need to get new sensory input. And so focus more on that. And you have the salience network. What does your brain select? What's relevant and what's irrelevant? Our and other people's studies show that the salience network in trauma gets completely messed up. So you hear a little sound outside and you go, "Bleh!" And if you don't have that, you go like, oh, there's just a little sound out there. But your brain can't distinguish it. And so then our job becomes, how can I help your brain to be able to distinguish relevant information? So we really, our paradigm is really completely wrong paradigm. It's behaviorally oriented, and our healthcare system became behavioral health, i.e., don't be a pain in the ass.
I haven't heard it like that, but I like that.
Dr. Kolk, thank you so much for your
You're
time
welcome.
today. Yeah, we hope that perhaps we can do this again with the next leaders of the mental health caucus.
Yeah, that'd be nice. So where in Australia?
So currently in Sydney, yeah. So we just got back a couple of weeks ago.
Not a bad place. I go to, I spoke at the Opera House earlier this year, which was pretty fun. But whenever I go to Australia, I go, I immigrated to the wrong country. You have the same feeling. You get to America, you say, oh, I went to the wrong country. But
amazing.
You got some good vitamin D over there. It also helps keep you happy and healthy.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks
thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Okay, good.
And
Thank
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for
It's
joining.
an absolute honor, and we so appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.